my coffee over here. There we are. Good morning, everyone. Here's a reveal on how my brain works. Some of you already know this, so you're just going to have to indulge me. You're just going to have to indulge me a little bit this morning. This is actually the wrong title for the parable we're doing today. The parable we're looking at today is the parable of the Good Shepherd. The parable of the lost sheep we are doing on January the 12th. So you're going to be seeing this slide again in a few weeks. That was my whole point of telling you that. But the parable of the Good Shepherd is what we're looking at today. And I know why I did this. I know exactly why I mistitled this. Because when I put the PowerPoint together, I wanted to use this image, which you'll be seeing again. Kevin Carden is a photo artist. He uses Photoshop as an artist. And he's done a whole series on the Good Shepherd and telling the parables of the sheep and using sheep in different images, even Eucharistic images. And there's one I'm going to use here that's actually very powerful. And so when I put the PowerPoint together, it was just, I was on autopilot. Oh, this is the parable of the lost sheep. But it's not. Okay? So this is how my brain works. You'll be looking at this slide again on January 12th, and I'll remind you of that. But the parable of the Good Shepherd we're doing today is actually, of course, one of the most beloved and I think deeply meaningful teachings that we have from Christian Scripture. We found it in the Gospel of John. This one's in John chapter 10. And the parable of the Good Shepherd, I don't know why my iPad keeps doing this. Y'all bear with me again. I'm having all sorts of technical issues this morning. John is actually, this particular parable in John has been, as you might imagine, very deeply mined for meaning across the centuries, like some of the others we've looked at. But this one is also, not surprisingly, a little radical. I mean, it's remember that's one of the beautiful things about these teachings is that Jesus is speaking in a contemporary context to people who would be hearing this, and there's something in the parable that they relate to on a daily basis, right? Daily life, the life of the shepherd. This would have been something that they would have understood well. How many of you remember when we talked about the parable of the leaven, right? Obviously, that was a contemporary reference for them. The parable of the merchant. Do you remember that I told you that merchants don't necessarily have a really great social standing at the times when we looked at the parable of the merchant? Remember, or the parable of the pearl of great price, not the parable of the merchant. The parable of the pearl of great price. You remember that? Well, we're dealing with the same sort of thing here. We're talking about a shepherd. And so this parable portrays Jesus as the Good Shepherd who cares for his sheep, who guides them, and ultimately sacrifices his own life for their well-being. So over time, as I said, this has been interpreted in myriad ways, and we're going to be looking a little bit at that, like the different interpretations of it throughout history, and focusing on its setting in the gospel narrative too, kind of simultaneously, I hope. Its patristic interpretations, in other words, what did the church fathers have to tell us about it? And then finally, the personal meaning I think it holds for all of us, which is where the good stuff is, right? The personal application, the personal meaning it holds for us. The setting of the parable, and remember, this is not the parable of the lost sheep. What are we talking about today? The parable of the Good Shepherd. Very good. It does help when it's turned on, doesn't it? It's turned on now. Thank you, Greg. The parable of the Good Shepherd is, as I said, embodied within the broader narrative of the Gospel of John. Understanding, I think, the setting in the Gospel helps us to appreciate the nuances of it. So, as we've done with the others, to sort of talk about where it is contextually in the Gospel helps us, I think, see where we're going with this. It's unique. Remember, the Gospel of John itself is unique in its presentation of the life of Christ to us. Unique in many ways, emphasizing not only his divinity, but also his intimate relationship with his followers. So John's Gospel presents this theological framework that underscores Jesus' identity, and this is important to this parable, underscores his identity as the Word made flesh, the light of the world, and the good shepherd. So we have law, we have light, and we have good. And this always takes me back. When I consider this, when you think about the way that John identifies Jesus as the Word, the light, and the good shepherd, it always takes me back to the creation narrative, just a little bit. You know, when you think about at the very beginning of John's gospel, the context there was, right? In the beginning was the Word. And then John uses the imagery of light so often throughout his gospel. And now we have Jesus being presented as a good shepherd. So the parable appears in a context where Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees. And that's always fun, isn't it? It's always fun when he's speaking to the Pharisees. He's speaking to the Pharisees and is following his healing of a blind man that took place in John chapter 9. This healing had led to a confrontation between Jesus and the religious authorities. Do y'all kind of remember that? That there was this, they were concerned with his disregard for the established religious laws. Is that ringing a bell? Particularly regarding the Sabbath. And the healing of the blind man, you know, symbolizes not just the physical healing, obviously, but we understand that to also mean there's a spiritual healing that took place. Pointing to Jesus as the one who could open the eyes of the spiritually blind as well. So that's kind of what the setting for this, the immediate context before this, that's what had gone on, is he'd had this confrontation with the Pharisees. So when he speaks the words of this parable in John 10, he's not just conversing with the Pharisees, but he's offering a critique of all of the religious leaders of the day. So if you again, this is why context is so important, because if you lift this out and like try to proof text this only and just look at the parable to see what it means, then you lose something really important, which is it is basically a critique. He's just had this confrontation. He's just had this kind of showdown with the Pharisees. So he's no longer really conversing with them. He's now offering a kind of a deeper critique for everyone who's hearing this. The imagery of the shepherd and sheep evokes something that people would have immediately identified with, this pastoral care that the Jewish people should have been receiving from their religious authorities, but were, in Jesus' view, being denied by the corruption of those, and many times, of those religious authorities. And here we go again. I'm not sure what's wrong with my iPad. I probably need to restart it or update it or something. Thank y'all for being so patient with me this morning. Where was I? Oh, the setting. Okay, the setting of it. So we have this confrontation that's taken place. He is now addressing a larger group of people, and he's drawing this parable for people, presenting the story of the Good Shepherd. And again, think about the meaning, or how the receiver would have maybe the way they would have heard this would have been a little challenging at first, like many of his parables are, because he takes something that is a little bit socially challenging, a shepherd, and as we saw with the pearl of great price, the merchant, not necessarily great social standing here, but he uses it as an important image, reaching again for the fringes, if you will. So the contrast he draws too between, this is important, between the good shepherd and the hired hand. Okay, that's actually very important too, because again, it's something that these people would have definitely been able to understand. That there is, y'all, I am so sorry. Must be some kind of demon in the machine this morning. My iPad keeps just skitzing out on me. I don't want to lose my train of thought here. Okay, so we got that. We got that part. The setting of the parable aligns with a recurring theme in John's gospel about the intimate relationship between Jesus and those who follow him. So that's the second thing. In John 10:14, he says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. just as my Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. So this relational dynamic that you see, that you hear here, is central to the Christian understanding. I am the good shepherd. So when you look at the, I always like to do this a little bit, look at what some of the church fathers have had to say, the patristic writers have had to say about the theological and pastoral concerns that they saw in the early Christian community. Some of these are still universal. I mean, some of them are very much bound in the time that these people lived in. As we so often see, the early fathers are thinking about the broader church at the time, specific heresies they might be trying to address in the church, and always sort of engaging these debates, engaging in debates about the meaning of parables based on what is going on in the early church. But here, I think we find something, some really good and rich stuff. So one of the most important patristic figures who engaged on this parable very early was St. Irenaeus of Lyon, who is living in the late 2nd century. He died in the year 202. So we're talking about the late 2nd century here, and in his work Against Heresies, which we've talked about in here before, specifically addressing some early heresies in the church, Irenaeus developed the idea that Christ as the Good Shepherd represents the oversight of the church, the plan for salvation for humanity that would be the right teaching. The good shepherd. Don't follow the bad shepherd, follow the good shepherd. So for Irenaeus, the shepherd's role was really to guide and protect the flock against heresies, symbolizing, for lack of a better way to say it, God's providence in human history in the early church. Origen of Alexandria, another important patristic theologian, although not a saint, that's because he got involved in some controversies, but that's for another time. Mid-3rd century, he died in 254, so mid-3rd century. He also interpreted this parable through what we might call a Christological lens. In other words, he's looking at it as sort of speaking to the person and nature of Jesus Christ as the Good Shepherd. He saw it as this representation of Christ's compassionate, completely selfless love of humanity. And in his commentary on the Gospel of John, Origen interpreted the, quote, laying down of life, this is his words, the laying down of life is in the parable is not just as a reference to Christ's death, but a broader metaphor for how God redeems the world, the entire world. So he explores the symbolism of the sheep. Now, this is something that Origen is interested in. The sheep. He emphasizes that the sheep are not. Well, let me ask you this before I even tell you what Origen sort of explored here. When you think of sheep in a field, do you think of those as particularly maybe strong, independent creatures, or do you think of them as sort of passive and just go wherever? Right? We sort of have this image of them as passive, right? Have you ever been around sheep? It's always interesting to me that people who think they're passive have never been around sheep because they're not. And Origen emphasizes this. They're not passive creatures. And so he points out that the fact that the sheep are following a shepherd to begin with is almost counterintuitive to the way that sheep normally behave. So this is a crucial part of the story, he thinks. They're not passive creatures, he says, but in this story, and in fact, a good shepherd knows this, even today, a good shepherd would know this, that sheep have to be active participants. They have to want to follow the shepherd. Sheep are stubborn. He argued that the sheep represent believers who respond to the voice of the good shepherd. This interpretation sort of reinforces the idea of the church. We have the church as being the flock of Christ. We're all called to listen and follow the voice of Jesus, which is understood as the Word of God. So then St. Augustine, who we always have to look at, offered a very pastoral, but more allegorical kind of interpretation of this. In his tract on the Gospel of John, Augustine discussed the Good Shepherd as the model for the ideal shepherd, because he says that this contrast with a shepherd who is hired, who cares nothing for sheep. You know, the difference between doing a job you are paid to do and fulfilling a role, a divine role in this case, he sees. Augustine's reading of this includes a discussion, another Christological discussion, the relationship between the Father and the Son, which is emphasized in this same chapter of John. It's in John 10:30, where Jesus says, I and the Father are one. So Augustine links those things together. That unity, he says, and this allegorical use of the Good Shepherd, he says, underscores God's unique ability to unite his people. And y'all, I am so sorry. Do y'all want to talk amongst yourselves? Maybe that would be better. I'm glad we don't have a full house this morning. Okay, so we have St. Augustine. And then, you know, I love me some St. Jerome, so we have to sort of look at Jerome. I was actually kind of scared to see what St. Jerome might have to say about this, because he's always a surprise to me. But he interprets it actually very, very much in the same vein as Augustine, that it is the church's role as the body of Christ, that Christ is the good shepherd, but Christ reigns in the church, and therefore the church is the good shepherd and we are the flock. Jerome also, interestingly, is one of the early figures who articulates in writing that the shepherd is a symbol of the bishop, the episcopal authority in the church, that the shepherd symbolizes that specifically, the pastoral leader of a Christian community. So, you know, by the 4th century, you've got a well-defined sort of administrative network going on in the Roman Empire of dioceses. And should I just restart this, I wonder? Then I'd be afraid it wouldn't come back. Jerome, yeah, 350, we're talking 350, I don't think of the years of his life, yeah. Yeah, he's 4th century doctor. Remember, he's the one that in 385 worked for Pope St. Damasus as the secretary and went to Bethlehem to translate the scripture into Latin. So he's obviously one of those 4 original Latin doctors we've talked about so much, and a personal favorite of mine because he actually chose to have his feast day on my birthday. So he's a personal favorite of mine. All right, so he sees this good shepherd as being the office of the bishop, and this is really one of the first times. And I was curious to know if this is one of the earliest references that we have, the link between the episcopate and the good shepherd. And it may appear in earlier Christian writings, but I couldn't find it. And I know that St. Jerome goes to great lengths to draw this parallel. So it makes me think that perhaps this is the first time we find that interpretation, exploring kind of the ecclesial dimensions of this parable and the real life of the church. So if we look at kind of the personal meaning then for Christian believers, and there's that image again. Beyond the sort of the theological, and I'm not going to take my finger off of this, okay? So maybe it won't go away. Beyond exploring kind of the theological and ecclesial dimensions that the fathers did, the parable of the Good Shepherd, I think, has profound personal meaning to us, to all of us. For many Christians, the image of the Good Shepherd, how many of you had an emotional reaction to this image? I mean, everyone I've talked to has, and I know the first time I saw it, I had this reaction. I told you that it's photo artist. His name is Kevin Carden. He's done some beautiful, it's Photoshop art, but he licensed these images for use. And I think that we all relate to this in some way. We could see ourselves as this muddy little lamb in the foreground, could we not? Have you ever been that muddy little lamb in the foreground? And I think when we hear this and we think about that imagery, even not living in this kind of pastoral community today where there are sheep in the field and there are... Who am I competing with? Okay. It's like I'm happy to yield the floor if I need to. We can all kind of relate to this image of this comfort and security and hope. I think especially in times of like uncertainty, when in our own lives, difficulty. The idea that Jesus is the good shepherd, knows and cares for each individual sheep. If you think of yourself as the mighty little sheep, go back and look at that image again and remember that this is actually, Carden titled this work, the title of it is Leaving the 99. Which again, that's why you'll be seeing this image again on January 12th when we look at the parable of the lost sheep. The personal meaning is rooted in that relationship that you see here. It is the relationship that Jesus would leave the 99 and come for me. And Greg actually pointed out something I never really, I knew that the sheep was muddy. Could really look at that little lamb. But lost and dirty and wondering, no doubt. The look on the face of this little lamb is confusion. And so I think it's something we can all relate to. This really, for me, visually captures the relationship that I know that I've had with Christ in my own life. It captures, for me, something very powerful. So as Jesus says in John 10:14, I know my sheep and my sheep know me. So for the believer, this is kind of a reminder that we are known and we are not alone and he's not going to leave us.
Cheryl, one thing that caught my attention too is the shepherd, how the urgency with which
Yes.
he enforced the sheep, because the sheep looks like it's very vulnerable. And
Right.
And
Yeah.
just running after him.
Just running after that little lamb. Yeah, exactly. So we're reminded that the relationship between a shepherd and the sheep is not one of some distant kind of authority, but of closeness. It's care. Jesus as the good shepherd. Now, can we stop and talk about that for just a second? Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. Well, what is he implying in that identity? When you say that you are the good shepherd, what kind of other shepherd are you implying exists? So he's already drawing a contrast, isn't he, when he describes himself that way? So as the good shepherd, he's someone who actively seeks out the lost. That's me. For individual believers, this means that no matter how lost or distant we might feel from him, Christ is always going to be there to call us back, to try to bring us back. The parable, I think, also encourages more of a personal commitment to discipleship, challenging us to follow the example of the Good Shepherd in our own relationships. So there's so much here. A model for Christian living, inviting believers to imitate him in our care for others, particularly those who are vulnerable or who are marginalized. And that's another way that you could look at this image. Yeah? People who are vulnerable, are marginalized, look like this. Okay? You don't just have to put yourself there, put someone else there. So there are several hidden, I think, or less immediately obvious meanings in this text, though. And that's what I really get interested in, is the nuances that we might consider radical, or, as we've talked about in here before, looking at some of these, that there are words that we read right by, or sometimes we hear them proclaimed. When the gospel is proclaimed, we hear this. All of us are familiar with these parables. But when you really stop to look at the words and you look at the ordering or the way that even the parable is constructed, the way that Jesus speaks it, there are things that come out that I think are perhaps maybe not intended to be hidden from us. I don't mean to imply that. It is something that's accessible to us, but it's things that we don't necessarily think about unless we go a little bit deeper. And our faith always challenges us to go deeper, right? Yes? Always. Okay, so talk about some radical themes. This is another one of Kevin Carden's images, by the way, that I find also very powerful. Anybody have a reaction to that? Yeah, it's quite beautiful. the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. So we have this kind of radical sacrifice of the shepherd's willingness to die. And in fact, a lot of more recent commentaries will suggest that it actually is one of the most radical aspects of this parable. Is, gosh, I'm going to buy a new iPad before next Sunday. Well, I won't be here next Sunday. Am I here? No, Deacon's teaching next Sunday, I think. So I am so sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on with this, except that it's got some sort of glitch that keeps making it skits out on me here. Okay. The radical sacrifice of the shepherd, the willingness to die. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. This is not just an image of protection, by the way, but this is profoundly self-sacrificial. In the ancient world, shepherds were often seen, as I've talked about before, seen as the lowliest of workers, tasked with leading sheep to pasture and protecting them from predators. The image of a shepherd sacrificing his life is radical because in that context, the value of a shepherd's life was not seen as particularly extraordinary. Does that make sense? So if a shepherd is considered among the lowliest of job that you could do, well, this sacrifice of a shepherd for sheep might not seem as important. But in the parable, Jesus transforms this lowly image of a shepherd into one of ultimate honor and ultimate greatness, equating that role with himself. The lowliest of the tasks in this world of the hearer of this parable is suddenly equated with God himself. We saw this with leaven. We saw it with the indiscriminate scattering of the seed. Remember that? We saw it with the merchant. The lowly is raised, redeemed, given prominence in the narrative of God himself. The lowly are raised. So I think that's kind of a radical idea. It would have been radical to the hearer if they really stopped to think about it. Probably resonated more with them than it does with us because they had that understanding of the shepherd. The shepherd's sacrifice signifies something that goes beyond mere protection. It's this voluntary, radical act of love that goes kind of beyond the typical expectations of a shepherd. So Jesus' claim to lay down his life for the sheep would have challenged all of the traditional notions of power and the power structures that these people would have understood. I think we miss that because we don't have that frame of reference. It would have resonated deeply with the Jewish listeners familiar with the sacrificial system of the temple, too. It would have resonated with them, where sacrifices were made to atone for sins. Jesus' willingness to sacrifice himself for a flock of sheep reinterprets that whole narrative for the Jewish hearer in a new and very radical way. We also have a direct contrast between the shepherd and the hired hand. Okay, the hired hand, when faced with danger, would do what? Flee. Yeah, would flee. Abandons the sheep. He doesn't have any personal investment in those sheep. The good shepherd, however, we're told in this parable, stays with his flock, even to the point of death. So it's not just about commitment. This is about something much deeper. This is about the nature of Christ himself and his relationship to humanity, comparing probably to the failures of other religious authorities. In the Jewish context, this might have resonated as a pointed criticism of those religious leaders. Think about that for just a minute. Remember the context here. He's just been in this confrontation with the Pharisees. So it might have resonated with as sort of a criticism of the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and others who were often perceived as self-serving. Jesus positions himself quite differently, and in the process of doing that, he actually critiques those in other positions of spiritual leadership. Could you see that? Without saying it, he says it, doesn't he? Without saying it, he says it. The hired hand is therefore a metaphor, I think, for any leadership that is disconnected from the people they serve. And that's another part of this parable. Those who are motivated by profit, by status, or by comfort. Yeah? Jesus' radical claim is that true leadership is not about any of that, but it's about this. It's about self-sacrifice and a deep personal commitment to other people. We also see this radical revelation, this claim about Jesus' authority and his divinity. Jesus does not merely describe the shepherd as someone who serves. He asserts that the shepherd, the good shepherd, did you hear that? The good shepherd knows the sheep in an intimate and personal kind of way. In fact, Jesus compares his knowledge of the sheep with the knowledge he shares with the Father. That's in John 10:15, pointing us directly to this deep divine connection. Okay, so it's as much a statement about who he is. It's the good shepherd. It's a declaration of his divinity, is what we are hearing there. Okay, so the sheep know the shepherd's voice. The sheep know the voice of the shepherd. Okay, how many of you have ever seen, there's this sweet little video that circulated on social media. I don't know, a few years ago I saw it. And it was a community in Scotland, I believe, that had come together. In Scotland, I know it was, because Scotland is where they have more sheep than they have people. And that's a true story. And they had this community of sheep farmers that wanted to do this little video and demonstrate that there was a shepherd, the man who worked with sheep every day in this flock, and he sent someone else in to work for him one day, and the sheep didn't respond to the shepherd because they didn't know the voice of the shepherd. Yeah? Now, that's a sweet story, but I don't think it's really true. Okay? How many of you have ever watched dogs work sheep? Which is kind of interesting, too. Yeah? So it's not, it's a nice story to think that maybe a flock of sheep would only know the voice of that one shepherd. But the fact of the matter is that that's not really true. That actually was debunked by another sheep community that did the same thing with a group of shepherds, and the sheep did whatever they were told. But they were working with dogs, and I'm not sure that was part of the ancient context exactly, yeah? So, what Jesus is suggesting here is more radical than that, because when he says that the sheep know the voice of the shepherd, the ancient community would have known that he's talking about someone who is a special shepherd. Does that make sense? You recognize my voice, not just any voice, but you recognize my voice. And the shepherd knows the sheep. Again, goes back and underscores that message that this is a personal relationship. This is not getting out in a field of 100 sheep and working them or pastorally caring for them. This is knowing each individual sheep that we saw in that beautiful image before. And then I think the last major point that we all have to kind of take away about this is the way that, trying my very last nerve here this morning, the way that Jesus presents this parable is that we're talking about, especially the way it's been interpreted by the fathers, is a diverse community, right? Do all sheep look the same? Do all sheep have to look the same to belong to the same flock? Are some sheep prettier than others? I don't know if I've ever seen a pretty sheep, but do all sheep look the same? I guess that'd be a better way to maybe ask that question. So what's implied here in the parable of the Good Shepherd is that this Good Shepherd cares for all of the sheep regardless of where they've come from. They belong to one flock, and that very quickly becomes imagery in the early church. Future Christian writers into the high Middle Ages, particularly St. Thomas Aquinas, uses this imagery a lot of one shepherd and one flock, right, to describe the papacy. We see that throughout the high Middle Ages and into the time of the church's probably darkest period in the late Middle Ages. You have this imagery come up again When, for instance, when you have in the 14th century 3 popes at one time, you have one in Avignon, you have one in Rome, and you have one in Pisa, because the Council of Pisa couldn't resolve that what we call the Great Western Schism. This imagery of the flock and the shepherd is throughout the literature of that period. And there's even Christian writers who are saying things like, speaking of the papacy in Rome, that he should be the good shepherd and not fleece the flock. Yeah? The good shepherd cares for the flock, doesn't fleece the flock. So this imagery really settles very early, as we saw with the patristic understandings, as meaning the church itself, the institutional church. And I think we see that even today, very richly embedded in our understanding of the institutional church, that there is a good shepherd. That's Jesus. Jesus is the head of the church. Yeah? Jesus is the head of the church. And we have shepherds who guide us. So there's this beautiful imagery we're always going to have of being a flock. And being a flock means it's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's not about the individual sheep. It's about the flock of sheep. And then we're a diverse group. And we have a shepherd who is willing to lay down his life for us, to redeem us. Okay, so I'm not sure where I was going next, if I was going anywhere next. So let's take some questions. Before I do that, I do want to tell you something. So this, we're entering a Jubilee year. Did y'all know that? How many of you came the other night? Oh, a few of you were here. We talked about the Jubilee year that Pope Francis has proclaimed. These happen every 25 years in the church. Going back, the first one was in 1300. Pope Boniface VIII proclaimed the first Jubilee year in the year 1300 to encourage pilgrims to come to Rome. And it's really great history of the Jubilees across the centuries. But by the 15th century, it became a sort of marked standard that it would be every 25 years the church would celebrate a Jubilee. So for those of you that don't know, Jubilee comes straight out of the Jewish tradition. You find this in Leviticus 25 that talks about the year of Jubilee. There's this cycle of 7 years times 7, and 7 being the number of completion of perfection. And so every 50 years in the Jewish tradition, there's a Jubilee, a celebration. It's a time of special renewal, special grace. And so the Christian church adopted this, but really not officially until about 1300, as I said, is the first one. So we have a really unique opportunity here at 2025 being a Jubilee, an ordinary Jubilee. We had an extraordinary extraordinary Jubilee year in 2015. Remember when Pope Francis decreed a Jubilee year in 2015, the year of mercy. And we had a holy door here at the cathedral. Everybody remember that? So this is an ordinary Jubilee year in 2025. The theme is Pilgrims of Hope. Pope Francis said in his bull of indiction for this Jubilee year, which if you haven't read, I highly encourage you to read it. It's typical Pope Francis. It's very accessible. It's very readable. I always find him very inspiring because it is accessible and it always resonates with this simple truth that I need to hear. But in his bull of indiction, he talks about how the world needs hope, and he uses this imagery of the shepherd. That's kind of where I was going with this. He uses this imagery of the flock of the church. And for those of you that didn't see this, I think they're still on the back table back there. We've got some flyers about the Jubilee year. Do you see those, Tamara? Okay. Some flyers about the Jubilee year that sort of give you kind of an overview of the different activities in the global church. There's some resources here on the back. The USCCB has got some great information about this. What we're being encouraged to do as individual dioceses. And there's also the official prayer of the Jubilee year on the back. Please take a few of those. We have lots of these, so take a few of those. So the Jubilee, because we're the cathedral, the diocesan phase, the opening Mass will be held here on December 29th. In the Bull of Indiction, Pope Francis gives specific instructions that is the diocesan bishop who will open the Jubilee year in the cathedrals around the world on that day. It has to be on that day, December 29th. We will not have a holy door. There's only going to be the holy doors. There's 5 holy doors in Rome, the 4 major basilicas, and a prison. He's opening a holy door in a prison, again, reflecting that message of pilgrims of hope. And who needs hope more than people who are imprisoned? So he's doing that for the Jubilee. And all that is to say that it's kind of come down to us to be talking about things that we might like to see for the Jubilee. It's a time of very, as I said, very special graces. In the Jewish tradition, it was a time when people, for instance, if you owed money, there's a remission of debts. There's a freeing of slaves would take place. It's a special time of grace and renewal. And so for us, because we do know that Christ reigns in the church, and this is a Jubilee, that we're going to have special graces. It's a time of special renewal for all of us. And I have to tell you, I'm excited about it because I'm probably not going to be here for the next one. It's 25 years I got to wait. I probably won't be here for the next one. I'm looking around. Some of you won't either. Okay? So I really want us to lean into this and really anticipate this time as a special grace, a gift to us. There will be wonderful things, marvelous things that will flow in the life of the church. I think that's why I went off on that tangent about the Jubilee, in case you weren't here to sort of know that, be aware of that. December 29th, the opening Mass here at the Cathedral. There's a special liturgy that the Pope's, the Dicastery for Liturgy has provided for that Mass. It is a Sunday, and it's the 5:30 Mass. It's the 5:30 Mass. And then I was going to get to that. Thank you, Janet. Thank you for reminding me about that. But yes, I was going to get to that. But the Jubilee will actually run. The official dates, if you look at the published dates, are December 24th through January 6th of 2026. But that's because that's when the Holy Door opens in Rome, at St. Peter's. December 24th through January 6th of 2026. The other major basilicas in Rome will have their opening is on December 29th. So it's just St. Peter's that has that extended Holy Door opening. So the diocesan phase then is December 29th, 2025 to December 29th, 2024 to December 28th of 2025. So what are we doing in the Jubilee year? Couple of things I want to talk about. The Pope specifically mentions in his Bull of Indiction that he wants dioceses to celebrate their saints, their blesseds, their venerables, and their servants of God. Well, we have 5 servants of God who, God willing, in this Jubilee year, we're going to be closing that diocesan phase, and all 5 of those, that one cause, but it's 5 men, of course, will go to Rome to the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints in this Jubilee year for consideration as venerable, which is the next step in the process. So please kind of keep that in your prayers too. This is a Jubilee year. I feel like it could happen. You know, anything could happen in a Jubilee. So there's that. There's also, we've been asked to emphasize personal spirituality, devotion, a greater awareness of the great mystical traditions of our faith. So anything that's connected to hope. You know, the theme of hope. Well, that covers a lot of things in Christianity, does it not? It's the whole message of Christianity. So what we're going to be doing here at the Cathedral is Father Rainey is taking the relic that we have of the True Cross. Do y'all know we have a relic of the True Cross? We do have a beautiful, beautiful one, beautiful reliquary. Every cathedral in the world has a tiny, tiny little piece of the True Cross. So we're going to be, that's going to be moved onto the Marian altar where the sacred oils are right now. There's going to be a special place for veneration of the True Cross there. We're going to encourage pilgrimages from across the diocese to that and kind of try to raise an awareness about our teaching about the True Cross. So for instance, in March, I'll be offering a special class, a little teaching on a Thursday night about the history and the theology behind the veneration of relics, and more specifically, how do we know historically that that's the true cross? Because it is. And I want to speak directly to that and sort of disabuse a lot of the things, negative things we hear in the world about relics. So that's part of what we're going to be doing as well, focusing on our 5 servants of God. Anything that we can do to direct people toward that theme of hope, we want to do. People are actually, I know that there are many people in the diocese who are taking pilgrimages to Rome to go through the Holy Door, or one of the Holy Doors. So, I mean, if that's something that's available to you, I highly encourage you to do that if you've not ever done that. And the other thing I want to tell you is kind of a little personal project of mine is the Vatican Archives and Vatican Library, which I've been remarkably blessed in my academic career to have been granted access there multiple times to do research. And I was thrilled to learn that the Vatican libraries were releasing digital, like high-resolution digital images of documents that you can download. I mean, if you have access to the library, and it's very simple to set it up, you can download these beautiful documents and images from the Vatican. And so I have an exhibit that's going to be in here. Actually, part of it's in here now. This will be, we've got, I think, maybe about 4 or 5 dozen documents right now. I'm adding to it all the time. So we're going to be rotating those through the year. It'll kind of keep it fresh. There'll be different things to look at. But that is what you're looking at there, Treasures of the Vatican Library that released for the Jubilee year. There's a couple of interesting things back there. I mean, I like all of it, but it's kind of a diverse grouping of things. We have two pieces on the end there that are from Galileo's file, okay, including his drawing of sunspots, which was placed into his file at the Inquisition. Because you see, he depicted the sun as having a blemish on it. So I took that, when you look at the sunspot, and I do encourage you to go look at those, he drew that sunspot, and when you look at it, when I downloaded it, I immediately thought, this looks like a microscope slide. It looks like a photograph of a slide. So I took it and to kind of trim the edges, and I sent it to 2 biology faculty and said, what do you think this is? And one of them said, it's a fungus. And the other one responded with, I don't do pop quizzes. I don't know what it is. And the first one was shocked to know that it was actually Galileo's drawing of a sunspot that he saw through the telescope. But it was introduced against him at his trial before the Inquisition. So they've released that along with his signature on the recantation, where he recanted, when he was told to, he ultimately recanted everything he had published. So that his signature is in that document next to it. There's also the bull that excommunicated Martin Luther, Pope Leo X. There's a letter from Mary, Queen of Scots, pleading with Pope Sixtus IV to intervene for her life, and she was executed anyway. He never answered the letter. So that's kind of explained there. There's a beautiful, I don't know how many of you know the poet Petrarch. You ever heard of Petrarch? The poet Petrarch, he's kind of considered the father of the Renaissance, this great poet of the 14th century. He wrote in his own hand part of the verse, and he drew this little hand pointing to it. And the subscript there is that I wrote this in my own hand. He wanted people to know he could really write, I think. So that's kind of a funny thing. And then there's a letter from Henry VIII to, it's actually from the Assertio Septem Sacramentorum, or the Defense of the Seven Sacraments, that's got his signature on it, that earned for the English monarchy the title of Defender of the Faith, which they still hold, even though they were told to give it back. Anyway, go take a look at that. Some of that's kind of interesting. And I'm going to be rotating those things through the year, okay, with lots of different things, wonderful things from the Vatican Library. Because my whole point is at some time I'd like to maybe even do a series about the church being on literally every page of history. Like you can't talk about anything in history of the last, now we're in the third millennium, you can't talk about anything in the last 2 millennia that the church is not there on every page. So, so take a look at that. And yeah, we've got a few more minutes. So any thoughts about the parable of the Good Shepherd? And I'm sorry about my I need to just, I feel like chunking it right now. But Walter, we're so glad y'all are here, by the way. Did y'all see the lambs are here this morning? The lambs. Oh my gosh, the lambs are here. Right. Yes, thank you for that. Yes. Yes. Other sheep that are not of this flock. Right, right. That was the point I was trying. Thank you for that. Yes. That was the context for this, a diverse flock, is he's talking about other sheep. So that the mission, that's traditionally been interpreted to mean the extension of the faith to the Gentiles. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. He's going on. Yeah.
Well, not in like the New Testament, the Old Testament centers around David as
Yes, being a shepherd. Right. David started as a shepherd. Very humble beginning. And again, to the Jewish hearer, there might have been some resonance of that, a connection with King David. For sure. I mean, it's like we've talked about, though, with when we looked at those, or the agricultural parables, when y'all learned far more about growing wheat than you probably ever wanted to know, that the hearers of these parables, these were all themes that they could relate to in some way. And you could actually spend a lot of time just unpacking what it would have meant to that hearer in the age they lived in, you know, which is why I find it so fascinating that as with the pearl of great price and a merchant being someone who's only out for profit, but yet remember that Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like what? Do y'all remember that? The kingdom, in that parable, the pearl of great price, the kingdom of heaven is like, it's pop quiz. Does he say the kingdom of heaven is like a pearl of great price? The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant. Whoa. Stop and think about that. Or the kingdom of heaven is like leaven. That would have also had that kind of resonance with the ancient hearer of not necessarily a good connotation. So here again, we have another one, and this to me is kind of the capstone. You know, Jesus is the good shepherd. He's using one of the lowest offices somebody could have, a shepherd, and equating himself with that, but in a way that redeems all of humanity, all of the flock. So, lots of rich and beautiful things in these parables. Yes, David.
One piece of context that I learned, I got to visit the Holy Land, and I was on a hike. We went by a series of caves that were built into a cliff, and one of them was a sheep cave.
Mm-hmm.
And it had this like mess of brambles and stuff with a tiny little slit. And our guide said, "Oh, this is you can see that this is a sheepfold because of the gate." And it's like,
Interesting.
there is no gate. It's just a slit. And he's like, yeah, so what the shepherd does is he gets all the sheep, puts them in the cave, and the cave stank like
Like sheep do.
sheep had pooped in there for 1,000 years. And then once all the sheep were in, then the shepherd goes to bed in the little slot. That's his bed. And so if you want to go in or out, you have to go through the gate, which is the shepherd. And I found that to be helpful just in understanding what does it mean for a person to be a gate?
Right.
That is not something that I have
And that's actually something we'll be talking about in a future parable too. So you need to be here that day. Share that story. Okay. Homework for David. No, and I think that's an excellent. We have these if you go to the Holy Land, you see that very clearly. You get some rich sort of context, because much of the landscape, of course, is unchanged, really. What else? Anybody have anything else? Everybody get pancakes this morning? I know. I've had visions of eating 2 of them, and the first one just kind of still sitting on my stomach like a brick. So, all right. Yes.
I just want to recognize the first mass at Notre Dame since it burned.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yesterday, Notre Dame reopened in Paris yesterday. Reopened after 5 years of really incredible restoration work. When I was there in 2022, they had just removed the scaffolding from the exterior of the building, but the interior was still a lot of work going on. So the thing that I've read the most, and I watched that yesterday online, the opening of it, and of course you're always going to have the critic. I mean, it's like we can't celebrate anything in the church without somebody jumping in with something negative to say. Bring you down, right? It's an ugly altar. I'm like, oh, whatever. Okay. So this masterpiece being renovated, let's focus on that. This restoration is just really magnificent. And I think the most impressive thing to me is from the photographs I've seen, you know, Notre Dame's always been very dark. It's dark from centuries of soot and whatever grime buildup. And it's magnificently bright in there from the photographs I've seen. So, yeah. Let's all take a field trip. Let's go see it. All right. Thank you very, very, very much. And I will see you guys. I won't see you well, I'll be here, but Deacon's teaching next Sunday. And then I think we have a little Christmas break maybe after that. So, see y'all next week.